So welcome, Chad.
Thank you.
Chad was with us about 2 years ago when Etsy was just a small little growing company. And I'm curious, are there any Etsy buyers or sellers in the audience, just to give us a feel of, wow, okay. So the title of this is Forging a Different Path. And so my plan is to have a conversation with Chad for about 15, 20 minutes, and then open it up for questions from the audience. So if there's a question that emerges as we're conversing, please know that there'll be some time later on to ask that question, potentially, depending on how many questions. We'll try and get to as many as we can. And what really impresses me about Chad and about Etsy, both himself but also from the other people that I know there and from the company, is that they've tried to do things a little bit differently. And even as Chad himself, as a CEO, he's probably the most laid-back, humble, chilled CEO that I know. And I feel like they're doing something that's a little bit different, and that I want to just kind of go more deeply into how they see business and how they see culture and how they see growing a company that actually has a purpose versus growing a company whose sole purpose is just to kind of increase their stock price, and the relationship between kind of doing good and also being successful. So that's like the overview. And I actually wanted to talk initially, Chad, because if the information was right in the article I read, when you had gone home to your wife and said you were offered the job as CEO of Etsy, the first thing she said was, "I don't want to be married to a CEO."
Exactly what she said.
And you responded?
I told her I was a little taken aback by it, but to finish a little more what she said, "I don't want to be married to a CEO. They're like tan and have big white smiling teeth, and they're kind of like George Hamilton, and like that's not the person I married." Yeah. And I told her that in being CEO, I really cared about the company, and I really felt like that was what I needed to do at the time. And I promised her that I would still be myself. And I actually asked her recently, how was I doing? And she said I was doing well. But I think that what she was
some room for improvement, but in general,
there's always room for improvement. But I think what she was responding to, and something we've talked about, is there is this kind of almost like archetypal CEO vision, like how you're supposed to be. And one of the things that I'm really excited about in a world that's more transparent and more open is that I think people are demanding more that CEOs really be whole people, not just the kind of two-dimensional CEO in the headlines. And so I actually think that that's like, to be a good leader, and it's always a work in progress, you have to be yourself, like fundamentally. Right. You don't become a CEO and then change and be the CEO.
Right. And so since Etsy's become a public company, I'm sure there's a lot more attention on you. And you had mentioned before that you've noticed your compassion deepening for people who are in the public eye more.
Yes.
Because positive and negative things can be written about you in a way that like your life is kind of not private anymore.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you're working with that?
So one thing I've realized is, as being a CEO in the public eye, like you get a lot of coverage, news coverage, and people tweet at you and all sorts of things like that. And what I've realized is that, and I notice this more with other leaders, is I think that we have a tendency to objectify public figures. Like we forget that they're actually real people. And one of the things that has been really gratifying for me in my job, I get to meet really interesting people, like people who might be described as famous, and other CEOs. And the thing that I've realized in talking to them, which is really obvious, but we do forget, is that they're people too. So I met a CEO of a prominent company once. We were seated beside each other at dinner, and we spent the entire dinner talking about fatherhood and the challenges of like trying to be a good father and trying to be a good CEO. And that kind of interaction really reinforces that idea that you're a CEO, but you may be a spouse, or you may be a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or you're someone's son, you're someone's friend. Yeah. And everyone has all of those roles in their lives, even if you're a CEO.
Right. And then when we if we kind of participate in the media frenzy at times, we click on things and read about people, and we're kind of feeding this machine, but it's not necessarily supporting the humanity, because the personhood, no matter who the person is,
Right.
there's a personhood that's there.
Yeah,
underneath
and I think we all need to really think deeply about that, because I think if we sort of dehumanize or objectify leaders, no matter what political spectrum or like what they are,
Either they're awesome or they're horrible or whatever.
they're awesome or horrible. If we do that, then I think that we create an environment in the world where only leaders who are willing to be objectified and dehumanized will do the job.
Yeah.
And so when we talked earlier and I said I was more compassionate towards other leaders, I think I've also realized, like outside of my role as CEO, just as a person and a citizen, as a person in my family, like all those things that I have obligation, like if I want a certain type of leader, then I also have to be a certain type of citizen in the world. And
Right.
I think being a leader is really, a CEO especially, has really taught me that.
And so how does that work at Etsy? So in the old frame of a CEO or of a leader is like everybody comes to you and you make the call, right?
Yeah.
And you tell people what to do, you basically kind of guide it. Where are you making decisions? Where are you not making decisions? How are you creating a culture that might be a little bit differently than everybody looking to one person to kind of tell them what to do?
Yeah, I mean, so people still do come to you and ask you to make the call. Sometimes
And there's probably calls you want to make.
there are calls that you
yeah.
you have to make, and I actually read a great interview with President Obama in Vanity Fair about where he talked about decision making, and he said that when a decision comes to his desk, it means that literally no one in the executive branch of the U.S. government could solve the problem. So by nature, any decision that came to him was a difficult one. And so some of those come to my desk. There are some that come to me and I ask the person, another person who is on the team to solve it, because it's always better, I think, if someone solves the problem. So I try to be, even though you do have to make the call sometimes, like I try to be really collaborative and open. And one of the things that I do every week that I find really gratifying and fun and interesting is I do a Q&A with the company that I call Office Hours. And it's just me sitting in a chair, much like this, not on as nice of a stage or as nice of an auditorium. And I just answer questions from people. And that's only been doing that for the past 4 months, but that's been really, really enlightening. And I find that all in all, people ask me hard questions. I've had questions about how do we think about gender equality and pay? Like how do we think about various things that aren't easy.
Yeah.
People ask me, what's the weirdest thing that's ever happened to you at Etsy? And I answer that. So it's kind of all over the map.
That's cool.
But
you make yourself available.
I make myself available, and I think you can always do better in that regard.
Yeah.
And it's challenging because Etsy is about 800 people now. So as a leader, you have to make yourself available, but you can't be so available that you're just sitting in meeting after meeting after meeting. So I think that happy medium is just having that open forum once a week. So again, I've been CEO for 4 years. I've been only doing that the past few months. So if you're a leader, I would really encourage anyone who's trying to communicate with their team better to do something like that, because it's actually really, from a setup standpoint, it's really easy. It's something that I look forward to, and in doing it every week, you kind of, I think, stay on top of issues that are on people's minds.
And so I'm curious, what is it? So the ways that I see you're somewhat different is you studied Shakespeare in college, right? You didn't get an MBA or a law degree, so that's a different background. And that when you adopted your child, you took paternity leave for quite a while.
I took the full paternity leave.
Which is?
At Etsy, I think it was 9 weeks.
So you took 9 weeks off.
Yeah, it's been a few years, so I
right.
remember.
Isn't that
Yeah.
And that's just almost unheard of for somebody leading a company to say, you know what, I have a kid, and we'll see you for a couple months.
So it's really interesting. I think that men really need to assert themselves on this issue and say, I'm going to take paternity leave. And in my case, I mean, Etsy, I think, is a really special company, and we have a really good board, but I didn't when I went to the board and said I was going to take the paternity leave, I didn't go in like in a negotiating stance. I said, my wife and I are having a child. We went through an adoption process. It took 3 years. It's a really special moment for the family. I'm going to make sure everything's taken care of back at the office, and I'm not completely off the grid, but I'm going to take the full paternity leave. And what do you think the board said? They said, great, send us photos of the baby. And so, but what I did find when I talked to other male CEOs, not just CEOs, but males in general, there was kind of a tentativeness about even asking. And so I think there are cultural expectations that we have to get over. And it was a little frustrating for me. I even found that some men I spoke with said, oh, when I had my kid, I only took 3 days off, like in sort of a bragging sort of way. And I was thinking, wow, like it's really important to set that example. And I would say some of the proudest moments I've had is when other men at Etsy have come up to me and said, I'm about to go on paternity leave, or I just got back from my paternity leave, and thanks for setting that example. I felt really good about it. My wife really appreciated it. And so, I want to see more men do that.
Got it. All right, we have some men in the room.
Yes.
And then going back, I'm sure we asked earlier, there's a talk on kind of mindfulness and entrepreneurship. And when asked how many people were entrepreneurs, a lot of people raised their hand. And I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs on Etsy, right? Some people would identify that even if they work in a company by day, there's some entrepreneurial effort, right, that a lot of us are involved with. Or we're fantasizing about being involved with it. And you work with both you as yourself as an entrepreneur, but also you've worked with a lot of people over the years who are trying to follow their passion and bring that passion into the world in a way they can make a living at it. And I'm curious, what do you see are some of the kind of qualities that seem to, are there any qualities that seem to present themselves from your experience working with entrepreneurs that you feel like might be worth talking about or highlighting?
Yeah. I think this may sound a little contradictory, being both single-minded but also open to possibilities. And like Soren, you mentioned that I was an English major in college. I studied Shakespeare. The only thing I used computers for were to write Shakespeare papers. And I thought coding was, from a distance, coding seemed really boring to me, and it wasn't very creative and all this kind of stuff. And I went to work at a newspaper doing a clerical job right after I had my English degree, just to basically pay the rent. And incidentally, also delivered pizza at night, which made my parents really happy. They're like, English major, pizza delivery guy. What a winner.
Education work.
But while I was working at this newspaper, I'm dating myself, but this is in the early, it was like 1993, 94. This newspaper, the Raleigh News and Observer in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I grew up, was the first daily newspaper on the web in the United States. So they were doing really web pioneers. So I'm filing, getting paid, $6 an hour, working 2 jobs to pay the rent. And I hear people talking about building websites. I start talking to them. They asked me if I want to help. This is completely outside my job description. They gave me these coding books and some small tasks. And the next thing I knew, I was writing code and building websites in 1994, 95, really, really early. So I always wanted to do interesting stuff, and so I was always focused on finding interesting things to do, and I really focused on putting myself in interesting situations, and I thought a newsroom would be a really interesting place. I worked with other people during that time who were also filing, but they didn't talk to the people building the websites, and I did, and I think it was just like curiosity. So once I went down that path, even though it was kind of on the surface looked like a diversion, I had real single-mindedness about it, and I spent when I wasn't delivering pizza, I spent 15, 20 hours a week reading books about Unix and teaching myself until I was able to build a database backed website. And so it was kind of the combination of being open and then willing to really go deep on something and stay committed to it, use your own time, I think are real keys. And and dealing with adversity. From Etsy, I think has been a great success story. It's still a work in progress. We're always, always working to make it better. But every day, things go wrong and you have to deal with it. And I think your ability to kind of look past that and just keep going is really important.
And have some resilience around the struggles and challenges.
Oh yeah, resilience. I heard I read a quote somewhere from a CEO where he said, if you're a CEO and you get good news in the morning, then you should go home because bad news is sure to follow.
And there was a quote I had read in the Washington Post where it says, just in terms of entrepreneurship and kind of the changing economy, as you said, I see the opportunity to create a new model for how commerce is done. I wonder if you could speak a little bit to how you see this changing marketplace. So now we have like things like Airbnb, we have like Uber, we have all this world where people seem to be doing business with other people. And of course, large corporations still are a part of it. And I'm curious where your thoughts on kind of where we're headed and what the possibilities are as an entrepreneur to kind of participate in this new marketplace.
Yeah, to me, the really magical thing about Etsy is the person-to-person interaction. When you buy things on Etsy, you're helping support an artisan and a maker, and that's a really beautiful thing. But on a pure business level, and this is something I think sometimes people gloss over, the whole business model on Etsy is based on making other people successful. So Etsy only makes money when our sellers make money, and it's really the success of that community of sellers is tied directly to our success. So I think when I think about the future of business, I think there should be and will be like more models where the success of your customers and the success of the community using your service is directly tied to your success, as opposed to kind of maybe the old way thinking about business where the only way for business to win is for someone to lose. And I think businesses like Etsy, businesses like Airbnb really challenge that notion. And I find that people in general have very dualistic notions about things like business and profit and social good and that sort of thing. And I think the real amazing things that are going to happen in the future that are already happening in the present are where we join the forces of like building a strong business, because everyone knows who runs a business, no matter how small or large, like the business has to be sustainable to keep going. Building a sustainable business that does generate profit, maybe not too much profit, but the right amount of profit, while also generating social good, that's kind of like the magic combination. And the dualistic nature that I've talked about, sometimes like I get criticism like Etsy's just trying to make a profit. We are trying to make a profit. And I think our sellers are trying to make a profit. And if we were running a business that wasn't ultimately profitable over the long term, we would be actually putting the platform in danger. So we try to find the right balance. And I think there's a lot of exciting ways to think about business that are very different from kind of the industrial age, extract from the ground, refine, sell.
And you've decided to be a B Corp, and I think you're the largest company ever to go public as a B Corp, or one of them. And that expresses a different kind of intention, right? That profit is welcomed, but then also you want to make sure that they're on purpose.
Exactly.
How are you guys doing with that in terms of?
It's still really new. We've been public now since April, so I guess that's 5 months. Time flies. And it's still really early. Like one of the things that we looked at when we went public, and this is very different than the way most people look at it, we were saying, how do we build a company that lasts for a really long time? And we looked at the original S&P 500. It wasn't the 500, I think it was 100. And I think there were something like 90 companies that were in the original S&P, which I think was in the 50s, that were still around today. So I think sometimes when we talk about IPOs and public companies, it's looked at, especially in Silicon Valley, it's like this sort of get-rich-quick scheme, and it's kind of a flash in the pan. But when you look at the history of business, public companies are very durable companies. And I think one of the reasons they're durable companies is because as a public company, you have to disclose your financial results. You have shareholders. In our case, we created a special allocation for retail shareholders in the Etsy community. And we did a roadshow where we went to Paramus, New Jersey, Red Bank, New Jersey, Milwaukee, and 3 other cities to talk directly to investors, investment advisors who represented people in communities that we serve. So we're thinking about being a public company, I think, in a different way than others have thought about it. But it's really early, and people pay a lot of attention to.
You're not sure if you're quite corrupted yet. Because
Yeah.
that was always the danger. Oh yeah, they do go to B Corp, but wait till they have to then, wait till the rubber hits the road.
It's a little like the CEO thing. Like there's kind of a stereotypical CEO, and I think as citizens we have to demand that companies that are public or private be different. I think when you look at private companies, something that we thought a lot about is I personally don't think it's fair that we have a generation of private companies that are creating extraordinary wealth, but it's really accruing to a very small number of people, venture capitalists and employees of tech startups. So part of our goal in going public was to, and this is something people forget, it means that the public can own pieces of your company. And even though a company like Etsy, any public company has institutional investors, the T. Rowe Prices of the world, the funds that they're investing from are in many of your 401k plans and your pension plans. So, I think the public company model, while it's imperfect and there are lots of issues that we could talk about probably at a different conference than Wisdom 2.0, it is the best way for a company to be owned by the public.
Beautiful. So questions, we have a few people with mics. And if you raise your hand, somebody will find you. I see there's somebody.
Hi.
And if you could stand up and just say your name and where you're from, it just kind of creates a human connection.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm Shelby. I'm from Los Angeles. First of all, I saw the Etsy offices this morning. They were really beautiful.
We did tours of Etsy this morning.
great.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks for the help.
Sorry, I wasn't there to say hello.
And I'm really interested in sort of office culture. I work for a big company, so I'm really interested in how you make community in a company. And you mentioned that the office hours is something that you only recently started. So I was curious about what prompted that. Was it going public, or were you getting questions from the community? What made you suddenly, after 4 years, decide to institute that?
So were there two parts? Were you also interested in how to create a culture in a business?
Yeah.
And then the second part, okay.
I'll take the second one first, the office hours, and it'll feed back into the first. So I think that when you go public, because you are on a quarterly reporting cycle and you have legal obligations to report information at a different pace, you do have restrictions on what you can talk about. So I won't get into all the details because it's just all legal stuff, but you can't tell your employees exactly how much revenue you made yesterday because that's considered inside information. You're not disclosing that to the public, so that's kind of an unfair advantage in an open market. So after we went public, knowing that we had gone through this change where we had to change sort of the way we communicated, the office hours is really me wanting to be more transparent with the company and talk with the company more rather than less. So that's really where it came from.
Without giving away details that you're
Without giving away
legally-
details, and we explain why. And so I think sometimes transparency people interpret as like just giving every bit of information as soon as you have it, but I think transparency is also being honest when you can't provide information. And that's all to create a fair marketplace, which is something I really started to understand going through the process. On the culture piece, I think Etsy's a very tech-driven company. Like, we operate in that world. And you've seen the office. It's a really beautiful office, very unique, very much like the site itself and the culture. But one of the things we tried to do is create a culture of gratitude and generosity of spirit and helping each other. So we have, for example, a support rotation program where everyone in the company answers support emails. And during the holiday season, during our peak season of emails, about 20% of our emails are answered by people who work outside of support. So engineers, me, others. And we also, while we take care of the team and people who work at Etsy, we try not to over-invest in perks. And that sounds kind of countercultural to what you hear in sort of tech companies in Silicon Valley, even though we're based in New York. So for example, we have a twice a week food program where we have lunch together called Eatsy. And we've been very deliberate to keep it at twice a week because we didn't want it to turn into kind of the everyday food program. So it's on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and people in the company look forward to it, and it feels special because it's not, it's twice a week is still, I think, very generous, but it's not every day.
Yeah.
And you won't find, pool tables and ping pong balls and like bouncy balls and all that stuff.
You want to make the work work rewarding and not necessarily extra perks as the reward.
We try to focus people on the impact of the mission and what we're doing to help our sellers be successful and to help build this different kind of company and different kind of economy. And so that's way more important than free food 5 days a week or ping pong table.
Great. Next question. I can't see. There's a woman right here. Unless there's somebody else. If you have a mic, you can stand up and ask.
Hi, I'm Vicky from London in England, of course. This might have been answered really in the cultural question, but I've worked for several organisations, some quite big ones with US headquarters, where the CEOs made a regular thing of doing kind of addresses to the nation. And it's kind of got to the point where we've sort of had to corral people to go after a while, because nobody really wants to sit there and ask questions. So I was curious about kind of what keeps it fresh for you every week and, kind of people wanting to, I'm assuming you don't sit on your own and do it. And in relation to that, what is the weirdest thing that's ever happened to you?
Well, what's the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me? I think the way to keep it fresh is and this kind of happened organically. People would ask me kind of off-the-wall questions about what's the weirdest thing that's ever happened to you. And so I think it became very information-rich. I mean, we talk about very specific subjects related to the business, but then there's occasionally an off-the-wall story. The weirdest thing that's ever happened to me, actually, between the time then the question was asked, which was maybe 5 weeks ago, and now, something took the place of the story. And I can't really name names here, but a very well-known celebrity showed up in our lobby and demanded to see me about a particular issue, and so we let this person in, and within about 30 seconds from learning this person wanted to see me until talking to this person, I didn't have time to process it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm standing in my office with this person, and it was like a dispute. It was a misunderstanding, and we took care of it, but it was just the wild. I wish I could tell the story, but it was just a really wild thing, and I texted my wife and said, I just got yelled at by blank. And she was just like, what? So strange things happen. And this particular issue was resolved really quickly. And then, but it was the kind of person that like you kind of fantasize about meeting, and you have this, you're going to meet them one day and you're going to have a great conversation about their work. And you realize like, wow, this person is yelling at me, and it feels a little bit like, this is not how I wanted to meet this person. Yeah.
All right, we have time for probably one more, if there's one more question. I know the weirdest thing that ever happened to you has already been taken. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Katie from Colorado Springs, Colorado. You mentioned wanting to be a different type of CEO, this whole person. So I guess my first question would be, rather than making an assumption, do you want that for other leaders within your company? And if so, how do you go about encouraging that, aside from just setting the model yourself?
Right. I mean, I think the most important thing, I do want that for other people, because when I talk about being a whole person, it means so many things. It means like whatever position you have, it means being good in that position, but also being a good wife or husband or father and that sort of thing. So I want I do want that for other people, and I think it's largely done by example. So I try to do that. You know, in terms of being a good father, I've worked in companies where, you know, someone has a sick child and they sort of make up excuses. They come to the meeting and they're saying, I had to deal with this thing at home, you know, and it's very mysterious, and they don't want to say I have a needy child and I'm like an anxious father and that sort of thing. And so I encourage people to say, just like if your daughter is sick and you need to be home, just say my daughter is sick and I need to be at home. And it's a very small thing. But I've always found it, you know, I've worked in a lot of different kinds of companies. I found it really silly when people try to pretend that they don't have other things going on in their lives and they have to make up stories. Just tell me. And I hope that filters down. But I think there's so much, like I said, I have worked in other companies. There's still so much in the work culture that doesn't support that kind of communication. So not everyone has worked at Etsy for their entire lives. And I find that it actually requires, in some cases, some like deprogramming of people and saying, hey, like here it's okay to say that.
And we're hiring you, and you're a family person, or you're a sister or brother, and we understand that that's a part of who you are.
Right.
This is something you hide.
And just from a purely practical human standpoint, in the case of the anxious father example, the anxious father is not going to be paying attention in the meeting or doing good work, or if they can't tell you what's going on. So I'm really surprised that more people don't understand purely from a practical standpoint. You can't have a world where people can't talk about those things.
Right.
Yeah.
It also seems, just to follow up briefly, that like inevitably companies create cultures, and that cultures have certain norms. Like some of my friends in Silicon Valley like says, oh, we're a total open culture and you can kind of be how you want to be. But if somebody comes dressed in a suit and tie, they totally judge them.
Right. Yeah.
Right? They do. And like Google and stuff, they're just like, oh, you're old school, you don't understand. So it's like, how do you create a culture, though, that where there actually aren't those norms, so somebody can come in a suit and tie and totally, it's like, that's just their expression, right?
Right. Well, I think we all have a lot of work to do on that. I mean, I'll give you an example, and you know, I think Etsy is a very open place, but one time I had a couple of lawyers we were working with come to visit me, and someone came by my office and said, there are some golfers here to see you. Because they had on sort of golf outfits. And it was meant to be gentle and funny, but it was kind of calling out, like these are people who are maybe dressed a little differently than what we normally see. And that, you know, I think we have to do better. Like, you know, when you see someone in a suit, like there are times that I have to wear a suit and people ask me, like, are you going to a funeral? And I say, no, I'm going to a meeting where I need to wear a suit.
Right. But it just seems like they're inevitably, if we're not conscious, we separate ourselves out from say, oh, they're the other, we're the creative, new, whatever, and they're this and we're that.
Oh yeah, and I think that we should all be, there's all kinds of unconscious bias, and just there's the way people dress, there's the way people talk. I mean, when I grew up in North Carolina, but I've lived in California for 10 years and now New York for 7 years. And I used to have like a real Southern accent. Like it's kind of disappeared a little bit. You can hear it sometimes. But I remember when I was in college, I went to Duke and I was on scholarship and it was a big deal to go. This is before I left and got a pizza delivery job. And someone this is the first time I ever thought about language as sort of unconscious bias. Someone in my hall asked me, they said, wow, you're from the South. Did you get into Duke on an affirmative action program for Southerners?
Because nobody at Duke would talk that way.
Yeah, there were a lot of people from North Carolina there, but it was a lot of people from the Northeast, and I was like, wow, and just the way I speak, people think that I shouldn't be here.
Yeah, wow.
And hello, that person.
Well,
yeah, it was just a weird thing. And so when I meet people who have thick Southern accents, like I don't assume that they're, backwards or not educated or whatever. It's, so I think that the bias goes in so many different directions. even when you look like a golfer.
Right, showing up at Etsy. Well, we are out of time, and so
Thanks,
I
Soren.
want to thank you for showing up, and also want to thank you for doing the work that you're doing at Etsy. And I know
Thank you.
you always say, oh, we're just learning, but I still think it's a beautiful model of how a company can be done. I just want to thank you and honor you for that.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you.